years have gone by. It's kind of silly, it's kind of idiotic, and it's just going too far.
I know John Kennedy is in heaven, where trouble and turmoil forever cease. I know his spirit will guide America and lead the world toward peace. He shall never be forgotten for the things he knew were right. I know John Kennedy is in heaven.
This way. Someday I'll be famous, and you can tell all your grandchildren that you once went to bed with me.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
He shall never be forgotten.
К имени и памяти Джона Кеннеди.
He was brave and a good father.
And when he died, when that comet disappeared over the continent, the whole nation grieved and would not forget.
May his soul be an eternal light.
As every past generation has had to disenthrall itself from an inheritance of truisms and stereotypes, so in our time, for the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Here the myths are legion, and the truth hard to find.
So let's go back to your beginnings and sort of trace your career from there on. Where were you born?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1917. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and I'm the second oldest, and they came very close, so we were pretty well jammed in.
8 brothers and sisters. That must have made quite a bedlam at times in the Kennedy household.
Yes, we had 5 girls and 4 boys, and it's a great pleasure growing up in a large family. I think it makes a tremendous difference.
Lovely pool and tennis court and swimming, and so there were all athletics going on all the time. And then Mr. Kennedy always used to get a guy to come up there, and then he had this man that would come up every afternoon, and you have to be there to work out with him. Back flips and forward flips and push-ups, and
this tremendous buoyancy in the Kennedys was always there, you know, playing games and talking and excited and in motion.
So that you could go to dinner or lunch at their house and there'd be 12, 14, 18 people there. And the conversation would be brilliant. The people would be happy. They would be talking about serious subjects without becoming heavy. Great gifts with people. Just fantastic.
Jack had difficulty with his infant feeding. And then he had scarlet fever when he was only 4 years old. And I think that did affect his childhood. He was sick. He couldn't take part in the athletics very much. So he had rather a frustrated life. But as I said, he never sort of complained and never said, this is terrible. He just went along smilingly and tried something else. While the others were out participating in the different games and exercises in the afternoon, he would stay quite contentedly in his room or reading books.
There was always something lonely to me about Jack Kennedy. Whenever you were with him, you always felt an apart, lonely thing.
Joe Kennedy was the boss. Everybody that knew them knew that it was Joe and Joe's money and Joe's influence that got everybody moving.
I don't think you can have 9 children in the house without it being some rigid authority, and I think my father supplied that, but not unnecessarily so, and I think it did us all good.
Mr. Kennedy was a brilliant man, but in terms of his ability to get along with everybody, Mr. Kennedy, all of his life, never had the time to worry about that. He was busy taking care of his wife and whatever the hell it was, 9 children, and making some money so everybody could eat, and being on Wall Street and being smarter than you and getting money when you were losing it. And that doesn't come because of the fact that he's spending all of his time trying to be nice to you. Do you understand?
And we're going to do it now.
He was a competitor, Mr. Kennedy was, a huge competitor. He never wanted any of his children to be second or third in a race. If they were in a race, they ought to win the race.
His father would go out and watch the sailboats, and then he'd say, "Why was your sail flapping when the other one was straight? The other one won the race and you didn't." And then they'd say, "Well, we bought our sail 3 years ago," and his father would say, "Well, find out what's going on. If you're going to race, right, do it right. You'll come in a winner. Second place is no good."
I am not satisfied to be second in outer space and second to the moon. I have heard all the excuses, but I believe not in an America that is first but, first if, first when, but first period.
She was a rather dim figure in their family life, I think. Old Joe did everything. He practically ran the house, the works.
I always thought that he should direct the conversation anyway, because I think people are more interested in what he thought about things than what I thought, for instance.
She did what she had to do with as many people as she had to deal with. And she had a lot to handle with Mr. Kennedy, too, you know. I think he thought that women were placed in the world largely to become objects for men.
I never heard him speak about his mother. Never.
He was not in favor of large families. He said it was like an institution. Well, there were so many of them that no doubt had to compete for the old man's attention.
I used to say if I ever wrote a book, it would be called Jack Kennedy Was an Only Child. I mean, he was so different from that whole family. He was one of the most polite people I've ever met. And it's not a particularly polite family.
Jack was a patrician in a way. His demeanor, the way he acted, the way he talked, it was different from the rest of them.
At that time, his brother Joe was still living. And his brother Joe was more or less the crown prince of the family.
His brother was big, rugged, played varsity football, did everything along the right lines. Jack was too small for that. He only weighed about 135 pounds. He played junior football, and he played on minor teams. He was known as Rat Face, you know. I think this perhaps bothered him a little bit, that he couldn't succeed more than he did in the eyes of adults.
Joseph Kennedy Jr. has come to England to be at his father's side. And there is still another son on hand to complete the Kennedy family circle.
He said, I'm going to have a small family.
There was one time when he talked about trusting your parents. That if Caroline ever got into any kind of trouble, he hoped that she would come to him and not feel that she had to try and deal with it by herself. And he said that his father had always wanted him to have that feeling about him.
All of us always knew that my father was, sort of best in crisis. And when matters were the most difficult, he gave the greatest support.
After the first debate in Chicago in 1960, almost immediately after the debate was over, he went to a payphone and called his father. And he listened and smiled and said, well, thanks an awful lot, Dad. He turned to me and he said, if I had fallen flat on my face out there, my father would have said, Jack, the way you picked yourself up off the floor was terrific.
He really wanted all of them to be, I think, in the public service. He never seemed interested in trying to get any of them to get into his own business operations.
He also felt that at the time his children were growing up, the place where the power would be in their future was in politics rather than in making money.
This is a paper written by Jack when Jack was 15. Justice by John Kennedy, 1933. A boy is born in a rich family, brought up in a clean environment with an excellent education and good companions, inherits a business from his father, is married, and then eventually dies a just and honest man. Take the other extreme. A boy is born in the slum of a poor family, has evil companions, no education, turns into a drunken bum, and dies worthless. Was it because of the rich boy's attributes that he landed in the lap of luxury? Or was it the poor boy's fault that he was born in squalor? Thus we see that justice is not always received from the most just. So how can we poor mortals ever hope to attain it?
Good evening. I'm Ed Murrow. The name of the program is Person to Person. And tonight we invite you again to go visiting. Are you there, Senator?
Yes, right here, Mr. Morrow.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Senator, you had some rather anxious moments yourself during the war, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You were in PT boats, weren't you?
Yes, I was during the Solomon Islands campaign. The PT on which I was on, PT 109, was cut in two while we were attacking a Jap destroyer on August 2nd, 1943. Interesting experience.
Interesting. I should think that would be one of the great understatements.
Ship at 2 o'clock! Hey!
It's a whopping adventure story of courage and action, a story worth telling, and the story of which every American can feel proud. The young man I play is a fellow from Boston. His name, Lieutenant John F. Kennedy.
I thought it was good. I saw it with the president. You know, he was kind of pleased. He thought the film, thought it was a fair representation.
We're getting out of here one way or the other.
What about the natives?
If the natives don't do it, we'll do it another way. But we're getting out of here. We have to get in the water and drag this damned island back with us.
After it was over, Jackie turned to us and said, now he's going to be trying to act like Cliff Robertson all the time.
He wanted to get, actually, Warren Beatty to be the play his role initially, and Warren Beatty didn't want to be tagged because he thought if he played the role, he'd always be known as Jack Kennedy.
So it turned out that John Hersey had written this article for the New Yorker called Survival. And it's the story of what happened after the Japanese destroyer rammed PT-109. But this was our key piece in 1946 when he was first elected to Congress. And this went to every young veteran. It's like sending out Christmas cards. And this is the group that would most likely be for a combat veteran like Jack Kennedy. It was Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy.
In his early campaigning, he'd always go in and look for where the back door was. There was a kind of an inferiority complex about the kid, to be perfectly truthful, when he was first running.
I will fight for the New England industry, which is so I will fight for the New England industry, which is so Oh, have to do it again.
One more, Jack.
For the people of this state and for the future of our country.
Jack Kennedy can. Who can make God glad that he ran?
I don't think he was ever really stimulated by the House of Representatives. Each member has a very small share of national responsibility. I think he felt that you couldn't make an impact.
Who can do America proud?
Boredom was, I think, was something that he fought all the time.
You know, he really accomplished nothing in the House. And he hated it.
Jack Kennedy can.
I think it's absolutely true that if he'd been left to his own desires, he would have been a teacher. He was a scholar. He loved the stacks, you know. He loved reading. This was what he really cared about.
It was Joe that was all great things were planned for.
His older brother, Joe Jr., was to be the politician of the family. Joe Jr., he seemed to have everything. He's handsome, a good platform presence, a happy manner with people. He got along well. He had everything. His older brother had lost his life in the war.
I think all the children understood implicitly that if one fell out, the other one came in.
He just naturally went to work to do what his older brother might have done.
Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable John F. Kennedy, United States Representative from Massachusetts.
In the first place, I don't see any point in giving these governments large sums of money, but I would, because a lot of it would be wasted, but I would, and we haven't got it anymore, but I would give them technical assistance.
He was a very fast talker. He gave his words very little emphasis. He was concerned with what he was trying to say, and he just kept talking.
If you can't win the support of the natives away from the communists, you can never win out there.
It's been mentioned that you are a possible or probable candidate for the United States Senate against Senator Lodge.
I plan to announce my plans about what I thought I might do.
I always had the feeling that when he ran against Henry Cabot Lodge in 1952, that he really wanted to get out of the House of Representatives, even if it cost him his public life. He said it was an odds-on effort against Lodge, but he didn't really care, because I think he felt that the House, for him, had become a waste of time.
At that time, I thought I'd make them definite, but I'm certainly considering it very strongly.
Vote this November, let's all remember, vote for Kennedy. Make him your selection in the Senate election. He'll do more for you and me.
He was the most natural politician I ever met without seeming to be. He had politics in his blood.
He's your kind of man, so do all that you can and vote for Kennedy.
The Greek word for idiot was someone who didn't take an interest in politics, so that I'm enthusiastic about my work, and I think, and I hope to continue it, but of course no one can tell in this business how long you're going to survive.
In Massachusetts Senate race, Representative John F. Kennedy scores one of the few major Democratic victories, decisively defeating in a tough battle the Republican incumbent Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., an early Eisenhower supporter.
Senator, you're the heir to really one of the country's great fortunes.
You were 9 years old, I believe it was. $1 million was settled on you. You might well have turned to a life of ease, pleasure-seeking, spent between Palm Beach, let us say.
Well, I must say,
Lon,
that I think a life of complete leisure is the hardest work of all. So I didn't feel that I could take on that assignment.
Tell me, Senator, are you simply swamped by invitations from Washington hostesses? I mean, you're a single man and a senator. That must make you most eligible.
Well, you would think so. No, nothing seems to have happened. Life goes on about the same as always.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, look, here is this gorgeous guy who was a terrible flirt.
Women loved Jack Kennedy. They loved him every way you could measure him. They really thought he was beautiful. He was a handsome-looking guy.
I've never seen a fella who was so universally liked by women. All women. They loved Jack Kennedy.
He felt that if he were going to run for the presidency, it was going to be essential for him to get married. A lot of people felt that he liked the ladies and was perhaps not inclined to settle down. He was really going places. She was a woman of enormous talent and social contact and everything else. So I think that they almost as a pragmatic consequence, they decided to get married.
Of Senator John F. Kennedy recalls Newport's one-time social grandeur. And former Ambassador and Mrs. Joseph Kennedy, parents of the groom, are among the personalities on hand to make this the top society wedding of the year. For the spectators outside the church, it's a real storybook wedding. A radiant bride, the former Jacqueline Bouvier, and a handsome groom. With a pretty wife and a politically rising star, the future seems bright for the junior senator from Massachusetts.
I think the best way that I can describe it is that they had an orchestra, and all the ushers would dance with her. And at the wedding party, I said, "Jackie, when did you fall in love with Jack?" She turned to me in her own quiet way and said, "How do you know I'm in love with him?"
Of course, John F. Kennedy was ambitious. No one goes into politics unless he's ambitious.
The new kind of person is going into politics today to meet the demands of a changing world. John F. Kennedy typifies this person.
I used to say, "My God, is there going to be another article about you?" And I said, "I'm so sick of reading them myself." And he said, "Well, that's fine." He said, "You see them all." He said, "But he said, do you realize that at this point only 72% of Americans even know my name?"
2815, Senator Kennedy.
Don't look up. This is Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts.
People on the Hill used to refer to him as Little Lord Fauntleroy. You know, I mean, the whole kind of feeling was that he was just out of his league. I mean, who's he to think he can be president, except he's rich and handsome, you know.
Certainly Kennedy had style. Style was important in getting people to pay attention to him. But if he had not had the substance to add to that style, I don't think he would have been a success.
Security. We are, as I said before, the hope of the free world. If we miscalculate and we're second rate, then that not only affects our prospects for military security, but it also affects the willingness of other countries to throw their lot in with us in the struggle against the Soviet Union. I would think that that competition could last for years until ultimately I believe the Soviet system, the communist system, will collapse. I do not hold the view, in other words, that we are at the last hour of a sinking civilization.
I think he, in general, enjoyed the world of ideas as well as the world of power. He'd like to discuss things as an intellectual would.
Ralph Waldo Emerson once said 100 years ago that there are men who every sound they
Here they think it's the crack of doom. Instead, it's the cockcrow. I believe that we are...
How did I meet him? I was 19 years old and a junior at college and going out for dinner with a boy from Harvard. And so when he came to pick me up, he said, listen, I've been doing some work on this political campaign. Do you mind if we go to a dinner? He gave a speech and some other people gave a little bit of a speech, and then Kennedy was walking around shaking hands at the different tables. And at the table I was at, there was an empty place next to me. And he came and he sat down and talked to me and asked about myself and who was I and what was I doing. Was I interested in politics? I was young, I was pretty, I could talk along. I was just thrilled and thought, oh, wow. He would have an associate come and pick me up and bring me to different meetings, and then we'd have dinner, and they would be nodding at me. They would be leaning across the table to say something just to me. Those signs of special attention. Yes. Eventually it became a love affair. And then when I left college, I moved down to Washington, and it continued to be a love affair. I mean, it seemed just what anybody would want, what any woman would want. He was looking for a mirror, someone who would keep reflecting back that he was fascinating and amazing and who he hoped to be.
A man for president who's seasoned through and through, but that's a doggone season that he won't try something new. A man who's old enough to know and young enough to do. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you.
The issue is not where I go to church. The issue is, do you want a Republican to lead this country for 4 more years?
We don't want to be voted for because you're a Catholic or against. What I would like to be analyzed is, am I competent to be president? If I'm not, I should be voted against by all faiths. If I am, then I should receive the support regardless of my religion.
Do you like a man who answers straight?
Senator John Kennedy of Massachusetts has constructed one of the most efficient, smooth, and well-organized campaign organizations in the history of modern American politics, sampling, testing, and selling the Kennedy candidacy. And the experts say his bandwagon is on its way.
Wave the sign! Wave the sign!
Jack always said, Coca-Cola and Lucky Strikes, they advertise every day.
There have been sort of brooded around by the opponents of your son that Joe Kennedy is trying to buy the presidency for Jack. Is there any truth to that?
Well, I think that's rather ridiculous because everybody knows that Jack has ability himself, that he works very hard, and that he has accomplished everything himself. And of course his father's interested, and of course I'm interested. But I think it's rather unfair to the boy, don't you, to think that
anybody in this way. The Democratic Party proudly presents to the nation, to the world, to the future, our next president, John F. Kennedy.
I was at a dinner once, and I said, I just think it would be a terrible job. You would never have a free moment again as long as you live. And he said, well, yeah, but you don't get to the point where you could be president of the United States and not do everything you can to get there.
Let me say first that I accept the nomination of the Democratic Party. accept it without reservation and with only one obligation, the obligation to devote every effort of my mind and spirit to lead our party back to victory and our nation to greatness.
I say that we cannot use the White House in these critical periods as a training school to give experience to a man at the expense of the American people.
I think that our chances that never happens in the vice president's cabinet. I understand that everything's in perfect order all the time. They don't get the votes, but it's well organized.
Jack Kennedy was a magnificent actor. I mean, he played the role really, really well.
I'm now going to have to give a new speech, evidently.
Certainly at Labor Day, when campaigns traditionally start, Nixon was the favorite.
You all know Pat Hillings, don't you?
Will you take count of two, please, Roger?
The first debate between the two really changed the equation.
Now, can I see camera one, please, on a close-up? Now, Bill, what do you want me to do? This?
Kennedy realized that this was going to be important. Nixon never believed it. In fact, Nixon, that afternoon, made a major speech. Kennedy rested.
I think that we both just, if he's agreeable, I think we just both just...
Nixon arrived first. They had all sorts of objections. They thought the chairs were too close together, and they didn't like the color of the background. So we had to repaint the set.
It's like a brick wall.
Because the Nixon people thought he was blending into the background.
Oh, and incidentally,
And I was standing there talking to Nixon, and all of a sudden I turned around, and there's Jack Kennedy.
Looking right at the camera here.
He didn't have anything in common with Nixon. He felt that Nixon was uncomfortable in his own skin, and he made Jack uncomfortable.
And I said to Kennedy, do you want makeup? And he said, no, I don't need any makeup. He was tanned. He looked like, you know, young Lochinvar, as he always looked. Nixon looked pretty bad, but Nixon heard Kennedy say, I don't want any makeup. And immediately he figured, uh-oh, I can see the headlines now. Nixon uses makeup, Kennedy doesn't. So he said, no, I don't want any makeup. And they came out, and I looked at him on camera, and I said, oh my God.
I think I better shave.
Are we in for trouble?
It is a pleasure to be here tonight and to participate in this program, which opens up a series of discussions, sometimes known as great debates. Is that about the right tone of voice?
During that campaign, he began to understand not only the tremendous power of television, but how good he was at it.
Frank Sinatra in his best days never touched John Kennedy. They would squeal and jump and try to grab pieces of his clothing, and the fact that they had touched him or come near him, they'd go away in ecstasy that they had lived.
On the border shop, our Jack can be Mr. Nixon better look out.
Even though those leapers and screamers might have been 16-year-old girls who couldn't vote, nonetheless that excitement was infectious. And I think many people in the country thought that. And as they would see that on television, they thought, my God, this guy's setting the house on fire, I better get with it.
The next president of the United States, on his shoulders, will rest burdens heavier than have rested on the shoulders of any president since the time of Lincoln. War and peace, the progress of this country, the security of our people, the education of our children, jobs for men and women who want to work, the symbolic feeling of a nation, the image the nation presents to the world, its power, prestige, and direction, all ultimately will come to rest upon the next President of the United States. And I do not run for the office of the presidency after 14 years in the Congress with any expectation that it is an empty or an easy job. I run for the presidency of the United States because it is the center of action.
At 7:19 a.m. Eastern Time, Senator Kennedy was elected President of the United States, one of the closest elections in the history of the United States.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will to the...
Here is a person who, to the rest of the world, has everything. He is rich. He is handsome. He is powerful. He is funny. He is intelligent. He has everything.
It was, in a way, almost that he couldn't be still, that he couldn't be satisfied. And on him, it looked so good. You know, you just said, oh, yes.
The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The American way can do wonders today. We can live without fear and build a brand new frontier.
He was the beginning of the modern life of this country.
People were so proud to be Americans.
He brought more people into the field of public life.
There were people in my class who wanted to go into the Peace Corps rather than Wall Street and make a whole bunch of money. Washington was Mecca.
He turned this country on.
Here as elsewhere around the country, there's a new haircut being taught in the curriculum, the John Kennedy haircut.
He was magic. He was a one-of-a-kind superstar.
And then I would say to myself, no, you're not supposed to look upon this as fun. This is very important, this is very difficult, this is very challenging. But it was fun.
Oh, it was a fantastic elixir for the country. America was old and stuffy. We'd had the Roosevelts there for centuries, the Trumans who weren't exactly zippy, and then we had the Eisenhowers, very military, and now all of a sudden, pow, class, grace, style, elegance, beauty, youth. That's quite a combination.
Jack said, that's really, if you could only have one thing, it would be energy, wouldn't it?
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there.
This is a president who's unpredictable, who keeps the Secret Service men escorting him on their toes with sudden impulses to drop in on his friends. It's a vigorous life, and it takes a while for those of us who are not used to it to keep up with this energetic new president of the United States.
He'd wander the White House and read everybody's mail. I mean, he could ask 14 questions in 30 seconds, it seemed to me, about everything under the sun.
You'd give him a piece of intelligence on the Congo, there'd be a scramble in the paper and a big rip, and he'd hand you this, well, read this on the Congo. Have you read it? And I said, well, I'm trying to keep up.
He liked fast conversation. He couldn't bear somebody who explained a problem in enormous length.
When he read in the intelligence report that most of the fatalities in Laos were a result of the shoes that were being issued pierced by bamboo spikes. He said, what's wrong with the shoes? Why are these bamboo spikes sticking them? So he said, let's get a new kind of shoe. He had a steel plate put in it. I had to bring the shoes in, drag them in. He wasn't satisfied to hear about it or read about it. And he actually took his shoe off to see if this was any kind of a comfortable footgear.
You run the risk of swelled heads in the White House.
And build a brand new frontier.
It's true that John Kennedy produced a fantastic image. There was some dispute between him and Jackie on how much the kids should be seen in the front line. Well, first of all, he loved the kids, and he thought that that was a good image for the fact that the White House had these young kids was something that was touching the American people. Scores of photographers just trying to get pictures of the kids, and that was something she didn't want. She wanted me to bar them from doing that. You know, there's some absolutely incredible pictures of the kids, John under the table, you know, under his desk in the White House, and Caroline there playing and so on. But all that took place when Jackie was on a trip, and the president said, well, now this is a good time for us to get some good pictures of the kids out there.
He idolized young John. Young John was so uninhibited. There was not the pretense of being conscious of himself. And his father just absolutely loved this uninhibited nature to it. As a result, he used to tease him all the time. And young John would tease him back. So John came in, and I don't know how old he was then, but he came in, you know, a little fella tripping in there, and he said goodnight, and he got to the door. His father's looking at him, and he says, "Good night, poo-poo head," and then races. And Jack got up, he said, "How dare you call the President of the United States a poo-poo head?"
Mr. President, it's been a long time since we've had a definitive report on your health from the best possible source. How is your aching back?
Well, it depends on the weather, political and otherwise. It's very good, though.
I also think that people don't understand what discomfort he felt at most of his life. His back hurt him a lot. He was hurting all the time. Have you ever had a back pain? That really hurts.
I heard stories that his back was so bad that they had to go down and lift him up and carry him upstairs from the swimming pool. But he would not talk about it. He did not demand sympathy. He just didn't want anyone to know about it. He would not have liked us to have gone up and said, "Oh, Mr. President, you must feel so bad. Oh, let me give you an aspirin." Oh, he would not have liked that. He was somebody stronger than pain.
He was constantly, restlessly attentive to the next question. And then we had this sort of unexploded bomb sitting in the inbox. What are you going to do about Cuba?
It was not so long ago that Cuba, the pearl of the Antilles, was a different kind of country. Her hotels a mecca for carefree tourists who flocked from around the Western world. Then Castro came, and the sounds of joy were submerged by the sound of shooting. Castro convinced the Cuban people he was their liberator, and they freely gave him the reins of government, a free hand that he betrayed when he announced he was a Marxist, dedicated to making the island a communist state.
In the presidency, you rarely get a choice between a wonderful solution and a terrible solution, or between good and evil. Sometimes it's between two evils.
Liberals all thought the jugular question was, should you even try it? But that wasn't Kennedy. If you could get rid of Castro, it would be good. Or to put it another way, if you could get rid of Castro and you hadn't done it, that would be bad.
Let's be totally clear that these CIA operations were put together in the Eisenhower administration, not in the Kennedy administration. That was not his operation, it was Eisenhower's operation.
Had he disbanded that exile force, word would quickly have gotten out that he had proven to be chicken and unwilling to stand up to liberate Cuba from the communists.
I mean, he went around the table and asked each one of those guys if they would go, and they said yes. And, you know, who was Lieutenant John F. Kennedy to say to these guys that they were full of
Cuba, April 17, 1961. The Bay of Pigs. The first units of the brigade reached the beach without opposition. But in the first hours, the brigade's 2 supply ships and its communications ship are sunk. The brigade has no food, almost no ammunition. At 3:45 p.m. Wednesday, resistance ends. In less than 72 hours, Castro has destroyed the brigade. The American planned, financed, trained, and backed invasion of Cuba is now a total failure.
For a few days, you know, he was really upset. 114 were killed and 1,189 were captured. He had only been president 3 months. It was the first thing he ever lost. That's what made him so angry at himself. He said, "Whatever made me say yes?"
There's an old saying that victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. And I wouldn't be surprised if information is poured into you in regard to all the recent activities. But I will say to you, Mr. Van Oka, that I have said as much as I feel can be usefully said by me in regard to the events of the past few days. Further statements, detailed discussions are not to conceal responsibility, because I'm the responsible officer of the government, but merely because, and that is quite obvious, but merely because I do not believe that such a discussion would benefit us during the present difficult situation.
The Bay of Pigs was such a setback for him, and we're driving out of the White House, going out to Middleburg. You know, he was really felt he'd let the country down, and you know, it was a gray, foggy Saturday afternoon, and he said, if they think they're going to get me to run for this job again, they're out of their minds.
Being rich is that you can always get what you want for yourself. You don't have to wait for it to come to you as a gift. So that everything he saw and every place he was padded and buffered and shined and comfortable and nice. That things should be better, yes. That he could do acts of personal kindness, yes. But the acceptance of inequality at every level, that women were not equal with men, that African Americans were not equal with white people, that Jews were not equal to Gentiles, that was absolutely accepted. He used to say, poor bastards. You know, that was it, those poor bastards. There are a lot of poor bastards in this world. He was a person of his time. He was limited, he was caught, and he was caught in privilege.
The
awfully hard to solve a problem when you can't get your fingernails in it and get them behind your nails so you can really feel it, you know.
No, sir, you cannot be admitted. I am not going to serve you.
Because of my race?
I'm not going to serve you.
Because of my race?
Move on. I'm not going to serve you.
Why?
Do you feel that progress in this area has been rapid enough?
Well, I think we can always hope that more progress can be made in the area of civil rights or equal opportunity.
So when people, you know, have him as this big flaming liberal, he was not. He was trying to fit it all together, you know, mentally. But the passion wasn't there.
The Negro is no longer following moderate white leadership in his fight for equality. He's taken matters into his own hands, and even the more moderate Negro leaders are being forced into more militant action, which trembles on the verge of something like racial war.
Mr. President, Martin Luther King has telegraphed you asking for federal action against anti-Negro terrorism.
We're in contact with Dr. King and others who have communicated to us.
We are tired of our children being tramped on, put in jail, and everything. So we want Kennedy to do something. We want action. If Kennedy doesn't do something now...
It bothered him that many of the blacks never thought he was doing enough. Jack used to say, what is the sense sending a bill up there and raising hell if we're going to lose?
Do you feel there's a need now for legislation in this area? And if so, do you plan to offer any at this session?
When I believe that we can usefully move ahead in the field of legislation, I will recommend it to the Congress.
His civil rights record was consistent with his general record. And that was, he looked like a president, he spoke like a president, and he acted like a politician who wanted to survive.
When I feel that there's necessity for a congressional action, with a chance of getting that congressional action, then I will recommend it to the Congress. Girls, I want to express my thanks to all of you. I can imagine nothing happier than to be a citizen of Girls Nation. So we're very pleased to have you here. I can think of no guests who are more appropriately welcome, and I'm confident that someday it's very possible that, or it may not be possible for you to be president. At least I'm sure that we're talking to a future First Lady.
I think women amused him.
Well, I don't believe in managed news at all. I thought we ought to get everything we want.
Well, I think you should too, Miss Gray. I'm for that.
Yeah, I think he was a chauvinist, yes. I think he felt that women were great in the kitchen, running the house, and in the bedroom.
I think he was obviously scared of getting too close to people, wasn't he?
He would not be my choice for a husband. I don't know that he wasn't a good husband. He may have been a very good husband. But I would not think that he would be, because much too interested in everything going on in the world to pay much attention to being a husband.
I thought that they had been through rough times and were coming out of rough times. And that they had come to appreciate each other in a way that I don't think they always did. They were fun together. Jackie was great with him, teased him.
They were both so smart. Don't forget, these people read 3 and 4 books a week.
Jack did not have a very good opinion of women's minds.
until Jackie came into his life.
I think they pleased each other. I mean, I think plainly she was pleased by his looks and charm and achievement, and he by hers.
He was so proud of her, he burst his seams, you know, when she would get all dressed up and they would go down into the glittering crowds.
I do not think it altogether inappropriate to introduce myself to this audience. I am the man who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris, and I've enjoyed it.
She was everything that, in those days, that young women wanted to be. I'm sure he realized for the first time how really valuable she was.
Now, I'm not saying that he then absolutely abstained from other activities.
I mean, everybody knew rich boys who got drunk and smashed up cars, and there were absolutely no consequences. Everybody knew that the rules were for some people and not for others. So he had every reason to believe that there would be no consequences for him.
And Kennedy was fearless. Whether they were blonde or whether they were brunette, I don't think. So I used to say to him, look, my friend, you're going to get your tail in the crack here one of these days real quick. You've got to be careful. He would laugh. Don't worry about it. We'll handle it.
Jacqueline Kennedy will be visiting a museum, a kindergarten, and a children's hospital in Venezuela and Colombia this weekend.
Mrs. Kennedy left in time to catch a regular commercial flight to Athens. The First Lady is the guest of the Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Karaman Lee.
On Sunday, Mrs. Kennedy and the wife of Colombian President Yaris Camargo will see the historic gold treasures of
America's First Lady went on a last-minute shopping jaunt today. Mrs. Kennedy spent 20 minutes in one of her...
One is supposed to be sophisticated and worldly. And there are arrangements. So a date would be made over the phone, and can we get together? Will you come over at 8 o'clock on Thursday night? There we go. There would be people who would say, well, right down this door or in here. And then I'd go up to the family quarters, and then, I don't know, there didn't seem to be a lot of people around. There was nobody around. I mean, I didn't go in my underwear and say, hello. Goodness, here I was, 20 years old, thrilled to the gills, having dinners in the White House, the Abraham Lincoln bedroom. I was much more eager to please than he was. He didn't have to do much to please. He had to sort of be and shine out his radiant ways. I thought I loved him, absolutely. To be as bowled over by this must be love. Because my best daydreams were literally at the limit of having a love affair with John Kennedy.
I had a young journalist came in to see me. He said, oh, I'm getting some very hot information that John Kennedy's having mistresses. And I said, well, listen, he's the President of the United States. He's got to work 14, 15 hours a day. He's got to handle foreign policy and domestic policy. If he's got time for mistresses after that, what the hell's the difference? And the guy laughed like hell and walked out, and that was the end of the story.
It was such common knowledge that I rather suspect that it was a subject that she was concerned about.
I think she understood Jack. Her own father was a guy who was very good-looking, very attractive man, and had a bunch of girlfriends. She had seen it in both her father as well as Jack's father.
I'm quite sure that Mr. Kennedy probably insisted that this was a way a man acted. A real man.
So this was nothing that Jackie was not prepared for.
Ray belongs. As far as any other place, you'd be sort of drifting.
You want to be with him?
Yes.
You're pretty much in love with him, aren't you?
Oh, no. I said no, didn't I?
Yes, you did. You want to do it again? You are pretty much in love with him, aren't you?
I suppose so.
We certainly got that impression. All I'm going to say is, I suppose so.
I've ruined it, haven't I? He had so many friends. He had a circle of pals. I don't think he had time to feel cut off.
And yet, he really didn't connect to people very well. And you felt that about him.
You never felt that John Kennedy needed anyone particularly. He was very self-sufficient. There's a certain impenetrable quality about him.
I never did experience John Kennedy in a moment of reflection or pain or sadness.
But he didn't wake up in the morning wondering whether he ought to see a psychiatrist.
Life is more than Rorschach tests.
And there are those who say, stay out of this. It would be all right if we were in a national emergency or in a war. What do they think we are in? What do they believe is occurring all over the world? Merely because vast armies do not march against each other? Does anyone think that our danger is less immediate or the struggle is less ferocious?
I am tomorrow requesting an additional $3,247 million of appropriations for the armed forces. I am ordering that our draft calls be doubled and tripled in the coming months. Husbands and sons will be called away. Incomes in some cases will be reduced. But these are burdens which must be borne if freedom is to be defended.
In Berlin, in Asia, in the Middle East, in this hemisphere, we will face challenge after challenge as the communists, armed with all the resources and advantage of the police state, attempt to shift the balance of power in their direction.
I suspect it is true that he thought he was more likely to gain a distinguished place in history from his foreign affairs leadership than from his domestic leadership. In particular, given the time that he served. He is the only president, after all, who ever really faced the prospect that, in fact, whatever he did might lead the nuclear war tomorrow.
Well, the missile crisis began when, against all our expectations, we discovered they were building missile sites in Cuba. Missile sites which could reach the United States with atomic warheads.
This was an effort to materially change the balance of power. It was done in secret. Steps were taken really to deceive us by every means they could. And they were planning in November to open to the world the fact that they had these missiles so close to the United States. politically, it would have appeared to change the balance of power, and appearances contribute to reality.
Look, in that family, and in the culture, and in the class, there's a tremendous emphasis on appearance. How does it look?
One option was to do nothing at all. But the president felt that we could not do nothing at all.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution,
the Soviet Union has rejected the American demand that long-range rocket weapons be withdrawn from Cuban soil.
There might be shooting among the ships at sea, the possibility that invasion might have to be undertaken to assure that those bases are eliminated. If invasion is undertaken, the Russians have said that they would retaliate with rocket fire. We have said if there's rocket fire from Cuba, we will retaliate, and there goes the whole ball game.
Moscow Radio a short while ago said the president's action is a step toward thermonuclear war.
You really are a prisoner in that goddamn office, aren't you?
Well, it's much easier to make the speeches than it is to finally make the judgments. One mistake can make this whole thing blow up.
There's a terrible loneliness about being president. You find that you've helped fill that gap?
I don't know. I think that's, I suppose it helps some having a brother here, but I don't think that, certainly that I'm any answer to that. In the last analysis, he has to make the decisions, and very difficult decisions. There's nothing that I can do or anybody else can do that's going to change that.
It shall be the policy of this
Выступая
nation.
вчера по телевидению, президент Кеннеди заявил:
President Kennedy's direct challenge to Soviet power and prestige will not be met lightly. It inevitably is causing the greatest agitation in Mr. Khrushchev's highest councils.
Khrushchev denounced the American reaction, publicly demanded the withdrawal of U.S. missiles in Turkey as part of the deal for his withdrawing his missiles from Cuba. The president felt that the United States could not do so under threat from Khrushchev with a gun at its head.
But neither is the president going to have a war over the Turkish missiles.
In effect, what we've told the Russians is this: the Turkish missiles have nothing to do with Cuba. We erected them out in the open, not in secret. They're there because Turkey and NATO wanted them and needed them, and still do. As for Cuba, we have said in no uncertain terms...
The Turkish missiles would be coming out in a few months. Mr. Khrushchev could be assured of that. But we could not take them out publicly as part of a deal. And if they made it public, then we would say there's no deal and deny the whole arrangement.
Nikita Khrushchev today did precisely what President Kennedy has been asking him to do ever since this crisis began. He ordered the dismantling of Soviet missile bases in Cuba under United Nations supervision and the return of the rockets to the Soviet Union. And he dropped the demand he made only 24 hours earlier for the dismantling of NATO missile bases in Turkey in return. Khrushchev made his decision known in a letter to the president.
And Kennedy never tried to boast of this as a victory. It was, after all, a shared escape from danger. That's really the nature of nuclear confrontation. No winners.
I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours.
And the survivors, as Chairman Khrushchev warned the communist Chinese, the survivors would envy the dead, for they would inherit a world so devastated by explosion and poison and fire that today we cannot even conceive of its horrors. How many weapons do you need and how many megatons do you need to destroy it? I said in my speech what we now have on hand without any further testing will kill 300 million people in 1 hour. Now that's and I suppose they can even improve on that if it's necessary. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, but we have no more urgent task. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal. Yesterday, a shaft of light cut into the darkness. Negotiations were concluded in Moscow on a treaty to ban all nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. According to the ancient Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. Let history record that we, in this land, at this time, took the first step.
Former Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, the president's father, remains in serious condition at St. Mary's Hospital here in West Palm Beach this morning. The 73-year-old elder Kennedy suffered a paralyzing stroke while golfing in Palm Beach on Tuesday. Phil was partly paralyzed and unable to talk from the effects of the stroke.
You know, that stroke smashed him. He would drool out of the side of his mouth. And I remember watching him at the White House. Jackie would, you know, have a napkin in her hand and sort of fix him after each mouthful. And all he could say was, no. He just would repeat, no, 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 over again, sometimes with a smile on his face.
This is Birmingham, the South's mightiest industrial city as the world knew it this week. On Tuesday, the Negroes gave vivid evidence that they would no longer accept the patterns of the last 100 years. The situation was perilously close to an explosion. The Negro leaders say this will lay the whole issue before the conscience of the community and the nation.
Вот уже несколько недель на юге Соединенных Штатов Америки свирепствует российский. Эти кинокадры были сняты недавно в штате Алабама.
Outside of America, a battle is occurring for the minds of the people between America and the Soviet Union. Because Kennedy comes to power at the height of the Cold War. Because Radio Moscow comes and says, yes, democratic America today, you know what happened there? They put hoses and fires on their citizens. They put dogs on their citizens. They bit them. So Kennedy understood, we got to clean this up quick.
Америки, говорит мировое общественное мнение, требуя прекратить зверство против негритянского народа.
The situation in Birmingham was damaging the reputation of Birmingham and the United States. And it seems to me that the best way to prevent that kind of damage, which is very serious, is to, in time, take steps to provide equal treatment to all of our citizens. That's the best remedy in this case and in other cases.
How did he change? Well, he didn't change. He was capable and he was gifted, and he was applying his gifts, and he needed time to mature him and to bring him to a point where people would accept his taking on the responsibility that he wanted. He just needed time to express himself.
preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes? That we have no second-class citizens, except Negroes? That we have no class or caste system, no master race, except with respect to Negroes? Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it is not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
Mr. President, this is a related question. Agents of Dr. Gallup asked people this question: do you think the Kennedy administration is pushing integration too fast or not fast enough? 50% replied that they thought you were pushing too fast. Would you comment?
The fact is, that same poll showed 40% or so thought it was more or less right. I thought that was rather impressive because it is change. Change always disturbs, and therefore I was surprised that there wasn't greater opposition. I think we're going at about the right tempo.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
Well, you had to have been alive there to realize that most of the people couldn't believe what he had said. I'm one of them.
And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure.
After all, the moon had been up there for quite a while, and we'd been down here for quite a while, and nobody had ever walked on the moon. And for some fellow who's president of the United States to say they're going to put a man on the moon, well, I mean, I can't exaggerate to you what a shock, what a vision that was.
And he loved the sort of the blind faith that they all had in him. Jesus, I mean, they would have followed him over the precipice, wouldn't they?
The feeling I had about Jack Kennedy always was that there were two people. There was this public guy down there doing all the things that presidents or candidates or senators do. And there was this little guy sitting up on a door jamb, making fun of him, laughing at him. Jack Kennedy didn't take Jack Kennedy that seriously.
Of Berlin by night and day.
You have to remember, Berlin was the absolute capital of the Cold War. I mean, it was divided down the middle, the wall was there, and that was an enthusiastic crowd. I mean, they loved Kennedy, and if there were any Cold Warriors in the world, they were it. But I mean, they were directly in the presence of the enemy, so to speak. It was, by the way, the biggest crowd I ever saw. I don't think I've ever seen anything even approaching that in the United States. If you'd been in that crowd at that moment and sensed that emotion, I think that was a natural place for Kennedy to rattle the saber a little bit. And he did, I think.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it's true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Lass sie nach Berlin kommen. Let them come. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
After he returned from that very successful Berlin trip, he asked me to spend the weekend with him up at Hyannis. The films came in. He had not seen them. He delivers Ein Bein in Berlin, or whatever, Ein Bein in Berlin. And he was clapping like that. In other words, he was seeing himself as if he were a third party watching it, sort of forgetting that he was the principal actor up there.
So the next day, we're leaving by helicopter. They'd have the father on the porch to see him take off in the helicopter. And as always, he went over and he sort of said goodbye, you know, touched him and kissed his forehead.
He was in bad shape. Terrible to see, because he was at a time in his life when he should have been enjoying his son's great triumphs.
And then he get in the helicopter, and if you know, his side had a picture window, and he's looking down at him. And he said, "Look at him, Dave. Look at him." And he made all of this possible.
In 1954, the communists gained control of North Vietnam. About a year and a half ago, Red Guerrillas opened up a far-flung guerrilla war inside non-communist South Vietnam. Since last year, America has been sending thousands of our special forces into South Vietnam.
Then the question always is, if Kennedy had lived, would we have gotten as deep into Vietnam as we did?
Could you explain to us, sir, why we have committed ourselves militarily in Vietnam?
We want the war to be won, the communists to be contained, and the Americans to go home. That is our policy. I'm sure it's the policy of the people of Vietnam. But we are not there to see a war lost.
Mr. President, have you ever had any reason to doubt this so-called domino theory? That if South Vietnam falls, the rest of Southeast Asia will go along behind it?
No, I believe it.
I believe it. I know people don't like Americans to be engaged in this kind of an effort. 47 Americans have been killed, but this is a very important struggle, even though it's far away.
You got to remember the man was president. He was president of the United States, and anything he said was going to reverberate around the world. If you are planning something as shocking as a pullout, you're certainly not going to go around and say, geez, folks, I'm thinking about pulling some troops out of there. Why don't you give me your opinion on whether I should do it or not?
In the final analysis, it's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them. We can give them equipment. We can send our men out there as advisors. But they have to win it, the people of Vietnam, against the communists. I think we should stay. We should use our influence in as effective a way as we can, but we should not withdraw.
I think on the whole, Kennedy would have been more reluctant to make the kind of further commitments that Johnson made, but I can't prove it.
This afternoon, P.S. Salinger announced that Mrs. Kennedy had a 4-pound, 10.5-ounce baby boy, 5.5 weeks premature. The baby is in good condition in an oxygen tent.
The president looked anxious as he hurried into the hospital and into a quick conference with a corps of doctors, which in layman's terms means that the child is having trouble with his breathing.
The president had already visited him 4 times that day.
The president looked visibly concerned by the expression on his face as he came along the corridor.
And I had the job of telling the president that the baby had taken a turn for the worse.
Patrick Kennedy died at 4:04 a.m. The struggle of the baby boy to keep breathing was too much for his heart. The president, his brother, the Attorney General, and the president's friend Dave Powers were with the baby when he died.
Has Mrs. Kennedy been notified here?
Not yet.
Jack went back to the hospital at Otis Air Force Base, and he had to tell Jackie that the baby had died. It was a terrible, terrible time.
The funeral services for Patrick Bouvier Kennedy will be entirely private. Only immediate members of the president's family will attend.
That one time he let loose and he cried. But just a few minutes later, he controlled himself and he was back being president.
Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement, and if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly."
In the public John Kennedy, you always had a tremendous sense of movement, and movement with a purpose. I experienced in the private John Kennedy a sense of restlessness. Change the music, what else is there to eat? You know, the tapping of the teeth, the tapping of the foot, the drumming of the fingers, a sense that there was something he wanted, but it wasn't quite there.
He was worrying about what he was going to do when he got through being president. And he said, I'm either going to be 47 or 51 when I'm finished being president. And he said, I have to have something to do. And I said, well, you write a book and you lecture and you do this and this and this. And he said, no, you don't understand. He said, I have to have some place to go every morning.
This is Dallas, November 22nd. President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed here today, period. The president suffered a massive gunshot wound in the brain and was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. With no one attending him but physicians and nurses, he died without regaining consciousness or uttering a word. Period. Paragraph.
In a curious way, the little guy on the door jamb is still looking down and, geez, you know, look what they made of me. He is, I know that.
Once upon a time, to my memory, there once lived a man by the name of Kennedy. He was a great man, and he had a great plan to straighten out this world, but he never had a chance. Mr. John Fitzgerald, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy. Now ask not of your country, what can it do for you? But ask of your country, what would it have you do?